Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. That's actually going to be pretty significant for this edition of the Groovy podcast, because we have three people here from literally all over the world. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, as usual. I'm joined by, how about Sergio? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Sergio del Amo. I am in Guadalajara, Spain, close to Madrid.
And we also have along with us Puneet.
Hi everyone, my name is Puneet and I am joining from India, near Delhi, city called Faridabad. So glad to be here, Ken.
So what time zone is now? All of India is like UTC plus 5:30, right?
Right, yeah, GMT 5:30, I think.
GMT,
something like right, yeah.
So what time is it there now, by the way?
It's 7:40 p.m.
But it's still on the 11th, right?
Yeah, it's still on the 11th, right?
Yeah, I always have to check. Yeah, I mean, when I talked to Paul King a couple of weeks ago, we crossed the international date line, so he was able to assure me that everything would be okay the next morning. That was good.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I was watching that video. Yeah.
Really? You're the one.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And Sergio, I assume you're like GMT. Is it +1 in Guadalajara?
Yeah, it's GMT +1. It's now 3 p.m.
3 p.m.
So
here on
3.
On Sunday, just a couple days ago, we switched to standard time. We went off of daylight savings.
Yeah.
So we're in Eastern Standard Time here. It is currently 10 minutes after 9 a.m. So this was basically the best time we could find for everybody. And I appreciate, Puneet, you giving up some of your evening for this. That's very kind of you. At any rate, the big topic that we want to talk about on this podcast is Grails 5, because Grails 5 was launched to great fanfare a few weeks ago, right? Along with, of course, there was an update just recently on Grails 5.0.1. And for those who are not aware, Puneet Behl is it actually official head of the Grails framework now at OCI?
Yeah, he's the development lead. He's the Grails framework development lead.
Grails framework development lead. Okay. So Puneet, tell us about how things are going and how the release went and whatever you'd like to discuss about Grails.
Yeah, the journey, the journey to the Grails 5 has been long pending. There was a bunch of things which came up in between, and unfortunately, we have to delay it to this time. Otherwise, it would be much earlier. But we are very excited that finally it is here. With all these things, Groovy and Groovy 3, Gradle 7, and updating to the latest. Grails is basically sitting on the shoulders of giants, and it's always good. To be on things like in fact I'm more excited about I would say the major highlight is Groovy 3. With the parrot parsing, or so
one thing that happens with frameworks like this, because you are resting on so many others like Spring and Hibernate and all of those, is that it's hard to keep up with the changes in those frameworks as well. I've been looking forward to Grails 5 because in addition to Groovy 3, of course, it also upgraded to Spring Boot 2.5, I believe, and that brings in Spring 5. Something, whatever it might be.
5.3, yeah.
5.3, and those are pretty darn current. I mean, that's pretty close to the current releases on those. Gradle 7 you mentioned, I think it's 7.2, something like that. 7.3 came out yesterday, with the only significant change being they officially support Java 17 now. So what versions of Java does Grails run on at the moment?
The current Grails core projects are basically built with 8 and compatible with 14 and 16, but it really depends on what version Groovy supports and Spring supports and Gradle supports. So it's basically a combination of all that. But I think users from a recent feedback, I'm not very sure about it, but some people are actually trying with Java 17 and I'm sure about 16, but yeah, I mean, there were some issues and we've been fixing back and forth, with Gradle 7.2. So so yeah, you could say we are always catching up. As you said it very well. I mean, like, we're always catching up to support the latest. So yeah.
Well, I don't think you're going to have too many people bugging you about Java 17 support for a while. I mean, most of the things that have been added to Java since Java 8 have things that were already in Groovy anyway, pretty much, or effectively in Groovy. So that's an issue, but not a huge issue. What I find interesting, by the way, is the future. Spring, well, the VMware people that have announced that the version of Spring, when they move to 6 at the end of 2022, they're going to actually require Java 17. And I find that amazing. I mean, given the distribution of Java developers in the community, I wonder if that's either if they're either going to back off of that, or that people just won't upgrade or what have you. But I suppose you've got a whole year to deal with those issues then, right?
So one
Right.
thing about the JDKs, so it's important. Grails 5 supports JDK 8 as well, which is very important for many users. So we are still supporting JDK 8 in Grails 5. And so that should be like a safe assumption that if you are like, I mean, I think it's fair to say that more or less everyone is at least in JDK 8.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So JDK version should not be like a problem to upgrade Grails version. And the JDK 17 issue. So what they announced in VMware is that they are going to support also Spring, the 2.5 branch for JDK 11, right? So
right.
I don't know. That's probably where Puneet comes, but I assume that Grails, at least Grails 6, will be based on that branch.
We've got plenty of time to worry about it. I mean, right. I know that the statistics I've seen relatively recently suggest that it was earlier this year, the number of developers on Java 11 first time exceeded the number on Java 8. Mm-hmm. And I know everything works just fine with Groovy 3 and Spring and everything on Java 11. And yeah. I expect that to go on. Now this is anecdotal, but most of the Java people I know are not planning to move to 17 unless they were on 8, and they may go directly to 17 because it's, again, a long-term support version. But I think we've got a long time before we're going to have a distribution that's not either 8 or 11 out there in the marketplace. So what else is in? I mean, okay, let's take a somewhat different tack then. Most people that I know, again, it's anecdotal, so tell me if I'm wrong. You have a lot more data than I do. Most people that I know working on Grails, there was an upgrade that went from Grails 2 to 3. That actually did change things, because as I recall, that's when they adopted Gradle as the build tool exclusively inside there. And that changed some of the project structure and everything. But then 3 to 4 was an easy upgrade, as I recall, and 4 to 5 sounds like it's mostly version numbers. So what would you say are that? Let's assume that we're talking to some people who have not really upgraded from 2 yet, and certainly not from 3. What should they be expecting?
So from 2, so 2 was using Gantt, right, as a build system. As you said, in 3 we started building with Gradle, and 2 was not even using a Spring Boot, right? So Grails 3 applications are Spring Boot applications, while Grails 2 applications, they were using a Spring as the dependency injection, but not a Spring Boot, right? So that's also like a major change that was in Grails 3 versus Grails 2. In Grails 4 versus Grails 3, the biggest thing is that you can use Micronaut because Micronaut is set as the parent application context of the Spring Boot context. And the major thing in Grails 5, at least for me, is, as Puneet said, that you can use Groovy 3, right?
Right.
So those are the biggest things. There are a couple of other things Do you agree with what you just said, Puneet, or would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, like the major highlight is Groovy 3, but there are a lot of other things as well, such as Spring. There are new features in underlying Spring and the Gradle. Gradle is a major update. 7.2 as well, and in fact, we are actively working with the Gradle team on a Gradle Enterprise. I think it's been a while since we actually touched the Gradle setup, and in fact the Grails core builds and other projects is very old, and it just works, and we never get a good amount of time to actually look into that and work upon improving it. And now we are actively working towards it, and I believe there will be improvements in the Grails infrastructure, but at the same time there will be improvements in the projects or user applications as well. So yeah.
So when you mentioned infrastructure, as Sergio was pointing out, I think it was the change from 3 to 4 when a lot of the internal infrastructure adopted the Micronaut approach to what I guess you call it ahead of time compiling for the dependency injection parts.
I mean, like, right? Yeah, I mean, like,
go ahead, Puneet.
Yeah, I mean, like, things like configurations, properties in Micronaut, like we are taking a lot of advantage internally in the Grails core as well, moving away from the configuration beans and creating Micronaut configuration properties such as data binding and, things like that.
So one thing that Puneet was saying is that one of the less sexy things about working in open source is dealing with infrastructure, and by the infrastructure I think he means, so we used to build Grails with Travis, and Travis has gone a little bit downhill. We have moved, I think we have moved more or less completely to GitHub Actions, right, Puneet?
Yes.
You've moved to which one?
GitHub Actions as a continuous integration server. So essentially
GitHub
the
Actions,
way, yeah, GitHub has a thing called GitHub Actions, which is essentially the competitor to Jenkins.
I'm sorry, I'm just my American difficulty with accents. GitHub Actions, you're saying you're doing everything with that. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know you could do that much. Oh, I suppose I use GitHub Actions as well, but I use their built-in infrastructure for building some projects, but I don't do anything anywhere near the scale of what you're working with. Are you using their CI server under the hood? Is that the idea?
So we essentially, both in Micronaut and Grails, whenever you have a pull request or a commit to master, we like run all the tests, and when Puneet wants to trigger a release, which is quite a complicated thing in Grails, we do like a commit with a tag, and that triggers a release, which essentially publish. Another thing that Puneet has changed is we are not publishing now to Maven Central. We didn't used to do, right, Puneet?
Right, yeah.
Right. Yeah, right.
So we still have the Artifactory. So we still have the repo.grails.org. That's an Artifactory still in JFrog infrastructure, if I remember correctly, right, Puneet?
Yes, that is, things with JFrog going down. I mean, like all the Grails previous plugins were on JFrog, and that basically, distracted us from getting Grails 5 out, and we basically worked on migrating all the existing plugins and their releases from JFrog to repro.grails.org, which is a JFrog Artifactory, another thing, but yeah.
Well, just to clarify for those people who are not aware, who haven't heard about this recently, JFrog was providing an open source repository called, well, JCenter is how you refer to it inside a Gradle build file.
Bin tray as well. I mean, like, yeah, right.
Yes, it was a bin tray. I have to admit, I'm one of those people who gets mixed up with the words bin tray and artifactory and using them all interchangeably and everything. But at any rate, they had an open source repository which was referred to as JCenter and Gradle builds. And I mean, the product is still, of course, available, the Artifactory product, and JFrog went public earlier this year. So I know they're doing fine, but they decided to no longer be an alternative public repository to Maven Central, for example. And they tried to give the community approximately a year to adapt to this by saying, we're going to keep this available, but you can no longer contribute new projects, etc. And this has had a fair amount of widespread impact on the open source community, because from what, now again, I didn't do a lot of this, so you'll have to tell me if I'm right on this. One of the benefits to JCenter for a long time was it's supposedly much easier to publish to JCenter than it was to M2 to Maven Central. And a lot of people did that.
I think one thing which is, I think, maybe confusing to me is, I mean, like, I think JCenter is a different thing, and there is a bin tray UI which, you know, allows you to manage and publish the Grails plugins. I mean, like, yeah, that has also went down with, you know, JCenter. I mean,
it was really easy to publish to bin tray, and then in bin tray there was like a checkbox which essentially will publish to JCenter. So will make your
right.
So when you publish to bin tray, you had like a URL that you could use, like your company URL, but essentially they had like a one-click publish to JCenter. So essentially, many people, myself included, if you wanted to open source anything, you will publish into bin tray, and then for bin tray you will say like, okay, yeah, publish to JCenter as well. And since JCenter was including everything in JCenter plus Maven Central, many people, in fact, had only JCenter as their only repository in their projects.
Right.
Yeah? Because that's essentially like whether you need something from Maven Central or something that was essentially not in Maven Central was there, right? So we're a bit more affected in Grails because we had like I think it was called like a kind of an organization in bin tray, where essentially like all the plugins were there.
I think one of the great feature, I mean, like, which bin tray provide, I still like that, is like, you know, it allow, you know, non-organization members such as you and anyone from the community can publish to coordinates org.grails.plugins. So, you know, you don't have something like, you know, org.ken or, you know, for example, Maven Central, you need to have a domain or something before you publish it. But that feature of bin tray went away as well. And it was a panic among, I think it was a panic among the community about how they're going to publish it, because, you know, it's, you know, we tried, I mean, like writing up a blog and everything, documentation on how to publish to Maven Central, but it is still a bit of work versus, you know, publishing to the bin tray, where we had something inbuilt, hosted from the Grails Gradle plugin, you know, where you just provide your configurations and it'll, voila, it publishes to bin tray.
So I mean, if I think about it now, I mean, first of all, of course, they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and relying on other people's infrastructure, this sort of thing is going to happen, you know, sooner or later. It's a good thing we still have Maven Central available. So as you say, there was a lot of adjustments, because one of the best features of Grails is that it is a plugin based architecture, that it has the basic functionality in it, but you could add so many more things using the plugin. So there was a big porting job moving everything over from JCenter, I guess I'll just call it, to Maven Central, right? Yeah. Now, by the way, now, of course, I suppose if I had to do something like that starting now, I'd look at Andres Almire's JReleaser project, right? Which is now making it easy to publish to everything, everywhere, under all circumstances. That might be something to look at in the future in Grails, but I mean, obviously, it's still early on that game. So at any rate, that's one of the things. Now, the other thing that's interesting about Grails from my point of view is that it's a trend. The pendulum is swinging back. For a long time, we had what they called monoliths, right? A single application that had everything in it. And then the pendulum kept swinging away from that toward what the architectural style known as microservices. And of course, Micronaut was designed with that in mind and is extremely good at that. And then of course, Grails is taking advantage of a lot of Micronaut advances, but it's still, quote, a monolith. Well, I want to tell you, I was talking to our friend Dirk Koenig relatively recently, about a month or two ago, and he has a wonderful term. Instead of calling them monoliths, by the way, he calls it integrated. Grails is an integrated solution. Doesn't that sound wonderful?
So, yeah.
Yeah. So for, you know, now that Sergio is the developer advocate here, you might want to grab that. You know?
I will steal it for you.
Yeah, well, it's Dirk. I mean, I'm more than happy to give him credit for that, but that was inspired. I'm going to use that term from now on. I'm going to say Grails is an integrated solution. But even so, you can almost see the pendulum swinging back because distributed coding is always hard anyway. And it's nice to have something where everything is all inside. What would you say is the use case for Grails as opposed to Micronauts, since you're both familiar with both?
So just with Micronauts, you can build monoliths as well, right?
Sure.
So we like to say that Micronaut is more like a foundation technology, and you can build. So we do have a lot of copy about microservices in the homepage, but you can build monoliths as well. So where I would prefer, so still Grails has some advantages. So one advantage is, for example, I'm copying your integrated solution. It has like all the pieces integrated, and in terms of, for example, the localization of an application, that's perfectly integrated within Grails. So there is a convention there. You have like your message.properties files. You have like a Spring Boot message source. You have access to localization things within GSPs. The rendering HTML on the server side, I like a lot GSPs. So I am quite a fan of the convention in Grails. So I think that's really productive in terms of if your application renders HTML on the server side, which I am quite fan of. I think Grails is a perfect fit for those kind of applications. So applications, so in Micronaut, typically you will do that with, we support several template engines such as Timeleaf or FreeMaker, Rocker. We support like several, but there is some kind of appeal on GSPs, at least for me, maybe it's because I am a bit biased for Groovy. And then for me is the whole package, the whole Groovy, Spock, JEP combination.
Right.
That's really powerful. That's really productive. So you can use those pieces in a Micronaut application as well, but there is some glue together. There is some glue that basically makes them stick together in Grails a bit better, right? So in Micronaut, you will have to like create a little bit more those conventions in your application. And then there is the Gorm. So you can use Gorm in Micronaut. But again, it is still really well integrated in Grails, right? So it's the whole ecosystem. I think Grails is still really a really powerful framework for teams which want to build such an application. So applications that do a lot of CRUD, a lot of create, read, update kind of applications. So applications that you need a lot of screens, maybe because, so we see, for example, a lot of people are using Grails in universities. We see that a lot in education. So we saw, for example, I work here with a government agency here in Spain. So people who needs a lot of like this kind of application that have a lot of screens for doing like administrative tasks where they need to edit some information that is going to a database. So more simple like MVC application where you have a database and an application running in a server. For those kinds of applications, it works well. So I think in terms of the biggest problem, to be honest, is at least in my opinion, is we need to keep people learning about Groovy, because the biggest challenge when working with Grails is that there are few Groovy developers. So one of the things that is hard to argue against is that it's hard to hire a Groovy developer. So they are good developers, but they are rare to find. So that's the biggest downside of working with Grails, in my opinion, is that going to the marketplace to hire developers is going to be more difficult. What we have always said, and I think that's true, is that you can train a Java developer easily to Groovy, because one of the nice things about Groovy, at least the thing that I like the most, is that Groovy doesn't try to replace Java. So I always say it's more like a superset. So you can put like a Java developer with no Groovy experience in a Grails application, and they could be productive fast initially they probably like see a lot of magic there, right? Because there are a lot of conventions in Grails that when you don't understand the conventions, they are like seem like magic, to be honest, when you first discover Grails. But that's the biggest challenge for me.
Puneet, did you want to
I
add
think,
it? Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I want to add to it. I mean, like as Sergio initially said, Micronaut is more kind of foundation kind of a thing. So, and if you notice, right, starting Grails 4 and 5, we are trying to integrate with Micronaut, more and more, and provide more documentation and support. And moving forward, I mean, like for Grails 6 as well, our major focus would be around better integration with Micronaut. So you could think it is. I think it is not what basically attracts me towards Grails is like convention over configuration, and the time you spend to build something is actually not configuring things, and it's just you create some controller views and everything is the whole CRUD, or you could say a skeleton, is already out there for you to follow best practices. You create a controller, there is a test for it. So I would see future of Grails to be shifting towards that, leveraging more and more features from Micronaut. And of course you cannot build something like serverless, I don't know about right now, or things in Micronaut which includes server, but things like Kafka client, RabbitMQ, and you could leverage all these things with Grails and Micronaut integration. What Micronaut provides is like ahead of time compilation and less memory footprint, fast startup times. So those we can actually benefit in Grails as well. So I would say it is not very I don't have anything specific right now to say, but I would say it would be more of getting the benefits from providing all the things which Spring provides, Spring and Spring Boot. You have a whole lot of things around that as well. At the same time, leveraging benefits from Micronaut as well. So it's like better from the both sort of things. I don't know how long we can do that. I mean, like as you said, Spring 6, I was actually looking towards that as well. I mean, like it would be a big shift. If you say the Java 17 would be the minimal Java support for Spring 6, and but we'll deal with that when it comes to that. I mean, like based on the community feedback and all that. But yeah, I mean, like. That's I would say it's like Micronaut is more kind of a foundation kind of thing. Maybe there would be something Grails would provide more features such as convention over configuration for Micronaut as well. I mean, like I think there was some guy who actually worked on it. It goes by the name I'm not sure, but I think it's Virtual Dog Bird, and he built something actually with Grails and Micronaut, and then where you could create Micronaut controllers using some same concept of opinionated version of Micronaut, something like that.
Well, I've always looked at Grails and thought, if I want a view layer at all, if I'm not just building a RESTful web service, then Grails is right there. Now, of course, Grails also exposes a RESTful web service automatically as well. So you can access your data, the part that's exposed that way via JSON data served up over a URL.
Yeah, I think Sergio mentioned it, like Grails GSP, that is one of the things, and there is also views JSON. I mean, that is very interesting as well. If you have markup views and JSON views, that is also very powerful. So actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead. That's one of the things I was thinking, by the way, is that, for the people who haven't been in Grails for a while, I mean, GSPs have been around from the beginning of Grails, Groovy server pages. But the JSON views, I think, was part that was added around 3. And that really lets you customize your JSON data in case you are providing a RESTful web service. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like, and also the plan is right now, the GSP is part of Grails code. And moving forward, we are trying to make it more modular so that Grails is not just this. So that you can leverage GSPs in the Micronaut side as well. I mean, like I think there is already something with the Gorm. I mean, like you can use Gorm with Micronaut, right? Sergio, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you can use Gorm with Micronaut, no problem.
Right. So yeah, it would be, you would see more of Grails in Micronaut. It's not just it really comes down to what you want to build. I mean, like a CLI application, I would choose Micronaut. But yeah.
it's always funny to me when I talk to people about, say, Spring Data, and I show them with Spring Data, look, all these methods are generated for you automatically, and they're all dazzled. And then I put in another method following the naming convention, and inwardly I'm almost weeping, saying like, Gorm does all of this and tons more, and it's been there for 10 years now. And again, the battle is getting people to learn Groovy just so they can see how much can be done for you to make your life simpler. I think Gorm is one of the great selling points of Grails, especially because Hibernate itself can get so involved with the individual sessions and the relationships and everything. And Gorm makes that so much more straightforward and so much easier, and uses even the, again, the Ruby on Rails people who like active records so much. Gorm is like, yeah, sure, we have all these methods right on the domain class. We can do that too.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that the Grails success is in part thanks to Gorm. So I think without Gorm, there will not be the success that Grails has had during these years. Because it truly was like magical to work with Hibernate with Gorm. You were asking before, like changes from someone coming to 2.5. One thing that you will see is that Hibernate and the whole transaction demarcation thing is a bit more strict now. So you have to be more like careful about annotating things with a transactional, a read-only. So we have, for example,
what were those annotations again? Say it again, please.
At transactional.
Oh, at transactional, right. That's right. Services are no longer at transactional by default, right? You have to say at transactional.
Yeah, and we have, for example, I think it was 3.1 when we disable. So, for example, you can not longer auto wire a service in a domain class. So that was, for example, that's a big change if you are migrating from 2 to 5, for example. So there are a couple of big things. As you said, Gorm has a lot of history, so you can do. So I taught a Grails course like a couple of months ago, and when you start with Gorm, you have like dynamic finders, then you have criteria, then you have HQL, you have where queries. Now we have Gorm data services. So there are like 7 things in Gorm to do the same thing, right? If you are writing any new line of code, I will encourage you to try Gorm data services because they are essentially the same idea as if you are using a Spring Data repository or a Micronaut data repository. So it's like an interface that at compilation times it's generated for you. So that's available in Gorm as well. And that was, I think that was part of Grails 3. I think it was in a point release of Grails 3, if I remember correctly. I think it was Grails Gorm 7 probably, right?
Yes, Gorm 7, right. I think 3.3 comes with Gorm 7. And I think, but I don't know, I may be wrong, but I think you would still use HQL, where you have complex query, which you cannot achieve through data services and, criteria.
So you don't use HQL directly, you use JPA-QL, I think, in the annotation.
Right, yeah, JPA-QL, right. Yeah, right.
Which, of course, is now all Jakarta API instead of Java API now. So, oh my goodness, you have to keep up with all that stuff too. All right, let me move away from the base technology, mention a couple of other major topics. Like one of the things that's changed over the past couple of years has been the establishment of the Grails Foundation, right? So can you mention a little bit about that as well?
I think, I think we set up Grails Foundation in order to, promote Grails and decide, in what direction we want Grails to go forward. And this includes, people from like Graham Roche and James and I don't remember the name. I think David Estes, the guy who behind the asset pipeline plugin. So we met every quarterly to discuss, what's going on and about ideas and, in what direction we want to move forward. And I think there is a link where we also add meeting minutes of these, foundation tab meetings, technology advisory board, we call it. And I can share it right now with you. Hold on.
Well, we'll definitely add it to the show notes then.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Now, yes, very good. Now, I should also mention, I suppose, that we mentioned this on the last Groovy podcast with Paul, but then again, I don't really assume anybody listens to that. So I'll mention it again, is that our good friend Sergio here is now officially a developer advocate for it's 2GM, right? Groovy, Grails, Micronaut. Yeah. So what does that, first of all, congratulations. Secondly, what does that entail? What's the new job involved?
So I heard your podcast, the last one.
Oh, you're the one. Okay, good.
Yeah. So essentially kind of spreading the word about the technologies. So what we have done so far is, I think both frameworks, Micronaut and Grails, are really mature now that you can build really cool applications. And I think that one important part that is missing is telling people that they can do that and explaining why they can be productive with these technologies, because at the end of the day, the people want to build things. And we are going to do several things to spread the word. We have started a podcast to rival with this one.
Good luck with that. Some people, nobody I know, but some people give you a hard time when the podcast doesn't come out as often as they expect it to. Yeah. Just to let you know.
Yeah, some people are.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I got to tell you. But go ahead.
I think that's a good thing. I mean.
So at any rate, it's called the Micronaut podcast, though, right?
Yeah, it's called the Micronaut podcast.
Yeah, where is that hosted? Just out of curiosity.
There is the perfect domain, micronautpodcast.com. So impossible to forget. Micronautpodcast.com will get you there. We are going to release an episode every 2 weeks. And
you say that now, but okay, go ahead.
It's essentially going to be me plus someone else. So it's I did one with Ivan Lopez. I did one with James Klee, and I will record soon another one with Graham Roche. So if you are or you're interested or in listening to like around half an hour about Micronaut every 2 weeks, that's a good podcast to subscribe. Another thing that we have done is we have created a dedicated Micronaut YouTube channel. So if you go to micronaut.io, hopefully there should be a link. In the bottom of the page, there is like a footer and there is like a YouTube icon. You should find a link to the YouTube channel there. And we have moved, we already had a lot of Micronaut content on the object computing channel. So we have moved a lot of content there. So there are like already like a lot of videos. And we are publishing there webinars, we are publishing there. So you know that more or less every couple of months we do like a webinar with, I don't know, like we have done an AWS webinar, a GCP, what's new in Micronaut 2, what's new in Micronaut 3, these kind of webinars, right? So you will find those. And another thing that you will find is we have started streaming in Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday. So actually we are recording this at 3 p.m. At 5:30. I will be streaming live in the Micronaut Twitch channel. What we are doing is we are building a Micronaut application from scratch, and the application that we are building is an application to essentially the kind of backend that you will use to capture newsletter subscribers. So I know that you have like a newsletter. For those who don't know, Ken has a newsletter called Tales of the Yard Side, where he writes like Bible long essays every week. So No, actually, he's a really nice writer, Ken, but he has like a newsletter that I think it's fair to say that you write quite long essays. Would you agree with me, right?
I do tend to hit the limit when they tell me I never know what I'm going to say every week. And then somehow when I'm writing it, Substack starts to warn me that I'm about to hit the email limit. And I'm like, oh, great. But yeah, it's just whatever I happen to be. It's a company newsletter for a one-person company. So it's always surprises to me that I have subscribers at all, but it is free and will continue to be so forever. I do see, by the way, I really like your Micronaut podcast homepage. That looks really nice and easy to subscribe to and everything. I noticed you've got that whole session on integration with Grail. I mean, Grail takes care of startup issues, but it doesn't make the request serve any faster, right? I mean, that's just out of curiosity. I guess I should listen to the podcast to hear Ivan talk about it.
So you have the same application running in Git, and you have the same application running with as a native image. So in theory, and I mean, they are trying to improve that, but you will get optimizations made by Git in the hot points of your application, right? So in theory, it will be even faster per request without GraalVM native image than with GraalVM native.
I've seen talks on trying to get Groovy to work with Grail, and it's a lot of hoops to jump through, as I recall.
Yeah. So we officially don't support Groovy, Micronaut, and GraalVM together. If you want to use GraalVM, we told you to use Java or the other language that starts with a K.
Yeah, that other language, whatever that happens to be, right?
So we essentially, so GraalVM is many things, right? So it's not just, so when you typically talk about GraalVM, you refer as the GraalVM native image, but there is like a GraalVM JDK, right?
Right.
So in theory, the GraalVM JDK, they have like the community edition and the enterprise edition.
Right.
The enterprise edition will be faster than typically the open source JDK, right?
Yeah.
But if you are thinking about GraalVM native image, which is more or less what we are all excited about, GraalVM native image in Micronaut it's exciting for any kind of application deployment, but especially excited if you have requirements such as a serverless function, where you are not going to have that running. So you need that to be fast on the first request.
Right.
And in this scenario, it's perfect. Or if you have like microservices that really need to start and stop fast, right? Or actually, you probably save money because running a GraalVM native image is going to be cheaper than running like a fat jar because the memory requirements are going to be lower, right? So there are the scenarios. It's really exciting. We have, as you know, Graham Roche is working in Oracle, and we have many of the team working in Oracle as well. Many of the core development team of Micronaut working in Oracle.
Feels so weird, but yes.
And they are in the same department than the GraalVM team, right? So this Oracle Labs has both the GraalVM department and the Micronaut team there. So I mean, I think it's safe to say that if you are thinking about using GraalVM, Micronaut has to be a great fit for that, right?
Okay, well, I mean, that's great. I didn't mean to get off on that tangent too much. I should mention, by the way, with the Grails stuff again, Puneet, I know you did a lot of work on those Grails guides, right? I mean, you've put together many of those, or you were part of the team that put together many of those. Is that right?
I think honestly, I did not work much on the Grails guide. I'm planning to work on setting it up, but yeah, I'm part of the team, and I think Nirav and Sergio are the guys who actually worked on the guides. Have more experience with the Grails guide.
But
yeah,
we should play them up anyway. I mean, they're really, really useful.
Give me a second, Ken. So we have news also about Grails guides. So we have been upgrading them already to Grails 5. So I feel actually Niro who is another member of the 2GM team here at OCI. He has done most of the heavy lifting, and I have been helping also reviewing and merging. So we already have many already updated to Grails 5. And most of them, they were already in Grails 4. So I can give you more or less what the upgrade meant for many of those guides. For many of those guys, one thing that Puneet has done, which is nice, is so we have a Grails Gradle plugin. And typically that plugin version was coupled with the Grails version. Now it's decoupled. So we recommend you to have, like, when you create a new Grails application now with Grails 501, you will see that in your Gradle properties, you're going to have Grails version and you're going to have Grails Gradle plugin version. And the Grails Gradle plugin version is not going to evolve as much as the Grails version, right? Because it's more stable. So essentially what that means is you're going to have one property more in your Gradle properties file. What it meant for us upgrading the guides is we upgraded to Gorm 7.1, we upgraded to Grails 501, views. There is like a new version of views 2.1, I think is the latest, Puneet.
Yes.
Hibernate was also upgraded. We are using 557, I think. And what else did we have to do? We are using JEP in many guides. So we are using this Gradle plugin from Marcin, which is the WebDriver binaries plugin. And we had to upgrade some of the Chrome versions and the Gecko version, which is the Firefox WebDriver plugin. And that's more or less what we have to do. Another thing that we did is, and I encourage everyone to do is, we have, so the REST client builder, which was the HTTP client that you will typically use in Grails applications, especially in testing.
Right.
That was deprecated, and we are recommending anyone to use the Micronaut HTTP client.
I see there's a brand new guide specifically, well, brand new. It's actually a couple of years old, but it's Grails with Micronaut HTTP client guide sitting right there on the latest page there.
Yeah, that's about using the HTTP client as your HTTP client, like for your main class path. A typical use case of the Micronaut HTTP client is you have like an integration test and their source integration test, Groovy, and the typical one that you annotate with that integration that starts the Grails application. Check the guides because we have many examples how to inject essentially a Micronaut HTTP client and point it to the Grails application. And the Micronaut HTTP client honestly is much nicer to work with than the REST client builder. So I don't expect any problems to migrate from REST client builder to Micronaut HTTP client. In fact, so many of you have I have, for example, for some clients, we were like using OK HTTP client, which is pretty common on the Android world.
Right.
Plus Mozy to do the binding, right?
Okay.
And essentially, when you use the Micronaut HTTP client, you just need one dependency because the Micronaut HTTP client. So if you have worked with Mozy, you know that it's sometimes a bit complicated, like to bind, for example, to a JSON array. It's a bit weird, the syntax. In Micronaut HTTP client, you essentially have like, when you work with the Micronaut HTTP client, you work with two methods, more or less, retrieve or exchange. And this, you essentially supply two parameters to those methods. One is the HTTP request, and the other one is the type for which you want the HTTP body to be bounded to. And you can bind, for example, to a JSON array with something like argument.listOf and a class type. So it's really easy. Just this is probably not the best conversation for a podcast, but I want to convey that if you have like a bunch of REST client builder code and you are feeling anxiety because you have to migrate to Micronaut HTTP client, it's really easy. And we have plenty of examples in guides.grails.org. So yeah.
Right. By the way, I didn't mention those guides are linked directly to the Grails.org homepage. You just have to click on it. It's all at guides.grails.org. It's the homepage for the guides specifically, but there's a link right on the Grails homepage. I should mention, by the way, that's another nice feature of Grails is that they have profiles that let you work with many of the major JavaScript MVC frameworks, Angular, React, Vue, etc. that all treat the back end as a RESTful web service and parse the JSON data and everything inside a JavaScript layer inside there as well. So that's also convenient. I find that when I talk to younger developers or maybe less experienced developers, if they've only been in the community for say 10 years or less, they don't even think about view layers. They all think about RESTful web services. Everything is, the backend is just producing and consuming JSON data. And when I talk about a view layer, they're like, what is this? What's this template engine? What is it? They don't know what they're talking about. So it's funny how, of course, you know, those of us who've been in the field a bit longer have again seen the pendulum swing all the way over, where it used to be all view layers and now it's REST. And of course, it's nice that Grails can do both. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, is there, I think that covered most of the things on my list. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up or wanted to discuss, either of you? Puneet, we lost your audio there for a second. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. So I think with Grails 5, I think Sergio mentioned most of it, but a few more things, you know, such as you may remember that there was a provided scope in Grails 4. I mean, like for in your build.gradle file, right?
Yeah.
So that went away. It was actually after Gradle 3.5 or something, it was actually just the name. It was basically an API, if you say in terms of Gradle 7, or a compile if you say in terms of Gradle 5. But yeah, so basically you would have to move away from provided because that has been removed. That was provided through some Gradle extra configuration plugin.
Yeah, Gradle has a different configuration for that now. I forget what they call it. I mean, there's a compile only, but there's something else too, right?
Yeah, I mean, like if you have your older projects and you have that, if you want to have the same behavior, you might want to switch to API, because provided anyways after Gradle 3.5 was doing API only. And but yeah, you might want to rethink about, you know, if with compile only if you wanted, but it is a bit different. But with the war plugin, you know, you could have provided compile. The Gradle war plugin provide 2 new scopes which you could leverage, you know, provided runtime and provided compile. So, but that provided scope has been removed. I mean, and yeah, there have been some changes around configuration. I mean, like, you know, things like a.b.c. You may not want to do that anymore, and instead you could say config.get property a.b.c, and you could specify the type. Basically, the reason behind it is earlier, you know, we were maintaining configuration in memory in a Grails application, and basically when you say a.b.c, we create a navigable map which has a key named a.b.c, a key name a.b, and a key name a, and then all the permutation and combinations of it to be able to provide a navigable map. And we are basically moving away from it, and maybe in Gradle 6 or something, this will improve the performance in terms of maintaining configuration in memory, and you know. So there are more things in terms of these changes from improvement. I mean, like metadata and yeah, things like that.
Very good. Sergio, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I would say encourage people to try to upgrade to Grails 5. I upgraded a client application that I have. It's an easy upgrade. You shouldn't find any major hiccups. If you find any problem, create an issue in the GitHub repository. Remember, everyone, that we have a Slack community as well.
Right, I was waiting. That it's not a dedicated Grails Slack; it's a Groovy Slack, right, with a Grails channel, or is there also a Grails Slack?
No, it is a Grails Slack.
Grails
there
Slack
are like
well.
there is a Grails Slack and a Groovy Slack. So I am a bit overwhelmed by how many Slack communities there are, because I have to have like I struggle a little bit with instant communication, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I found it. That's right, and yeah, there's so many of those. Everybody has way too many, right?
So it's a bit tough to keep up, but it's a nice place to hang up if you are like using Grails. And yeah, we keep listening to the Groovy podcast, keep using Groovy. We use Groovy. So I spend most of my time working with Groovy and Java nowadays. So the Micronaut framework is tested with Groovy in every module. So we have a lot of Groovy code. I have been happily living in the Groovy 3 world for a long time because we have been using Groovy 3 for a long time in Micronaut. So if, one of the nice things, for example, is you can use the Java Streams API as if you were like writing Java, no need to use like a Lambda or things like that. So if just for being able like to use Java features, fully compatible, try with resources works. Not that I use it much, but it works. So there are like, it's like almost like how it felt to use Groovy, like when Java it was here, like it was like parity, right? That you are like not missing things from Java. Groovy 3 for me feels the same way. So if you are like, if you can upgrade to Grails 5, don't hesitate because Groovy 3 is nice.
Then finally, sorry, go ahead, Puneet.
I mean, like one important thing I noticed while working on Grails 5 and all the sub projects such as Gorms and other migrating to Groovy 3 is now that Groovy is a bit more strict in terms of compile static. I mean, like you may see some warnings around it and some errors, but those are good things. And if you have basic things, you may not see anything. But for complex scenarios, Groovy is more stricter than before. You will see more compile time errors versus earlier. And I would love to hear more about people migrating to Grails 5. I know you have one project you're planning to work on, migrating from Grails 2 point something to 5, right?
I'm hoping it's a company that may be migrating, and they're in the middle of an end of year crunch. So if I have anything like that, it'll probably start early next year. But I really hope this sort of thing happens. I've always been very fond of both Groovy and Grails, and I really do hope that we see a resurgence in interest in both of those. And it could happen. It's not an unusual thing in this field for the pendulum to start swinging back again. Let me ask you this. Do you have any upcoming conferences, either online or in person or anything like that coming up? Anywhere you're going to be speaking or any topics you want to talk about?
To be honest, no. This year has been a little tough on me, and my availability is kind of a very on and off kind of a thing, and I don't know what happened to me, and my immune system has been very weak, and
my condolences.
I mean, like I just had the COVID, and then I had dengue, and then I don't know what next.
Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping that the vaccines become more and more available and more effective. I mean, I've been getting everything I could possibly get. I've gotten both shots and a booster, so I'm still not really traveling yet, but I'm expecting that there will be. I mean, I believe we're expecting the summit next year. What am I thinking? The name of the summit? The one in Copenhagen every year. I'm just blanking on it automatically.
Great Conf.
Great Conf, exactly. So I expect that will happen sometime in the, I guess, late spring, early summer, as usual. They don't have dates yet. How about Greach? Is there any chance of a Greach next year as well?
No news about Greach.
No news yet. Okay, so awkward question. Good. All right. Well, in the meantime, I really appreciate both of you taking the time to be on the podcast. As with everything, scheduling is always an adventure, especially with 3 people rather than 2. So that's very kind of you, and especially when we've got 14 different time zones, a span of 14 time zones represented here. So that's great, and I wish you definitely the best in what you're doing, and Sergio, I'm glad you are going to wind up with this massive commitment for the future for your own Micronaut podcast as well.
Yeah, it's very fun.
I think for me, I think Sergio has been doing this job for a long time before he gets this title. I mean, like, he had this Groovy calamari, and, he's been very active in the community regarding blogs and, updates and news.
Wait, Groovy calamari, what's that? I don't remember that at all.
That's coming back. So I am writing the backend now in Micronaut Live. So if you tune into twitch.tv/Micronaut FW every Tuesday and Thursday
Yeah, that's something we definitely
10:30
don't have
CST,
is a Twitch channel for Grails. We're gonna have to come up with something there, Puneet, right?
for the Groovy podcast.
Okay, well,
No.
thank you. Oh, sorry. Anything else or all set?
No. All set.
I think
Oh, okay.
just for the wrap up, I mean, like for the Grails users of the community, I mean, like there are a lot of exciting things coming in Grails, 5 and upcoming releases. I mean, like we've been working on updating the database migration plugin to use the latest liquid base and updating Spring Security to use the latest version of Spring Security.
Very good.
And improvements to the Grails CLI. There will be a brand new thing for Grails CLI and guides, infrastructure. Yeah, go ahead, please.
That reminds me, by the way, I had to use the Grails CLI because I was having difficulty with IntelliJ IDEA integration. And then you saw when they released the latest version of IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate, they fixed all that. And now I'm back to being able to use the full IntelliJ functionality for Grails.
Right. Yeah, I think I reported an issue in the JetBrains regarding the same, and they recently fixed it. I moved. I think that is a EAP release or something.
Yes, it's right.
But I still see some of the checkboxes disabled or something confusing. I didn't get a chance to dig into it, but I think when you build application from IntelliJ, I think the web application has GSP checkbox disabled and unchecked. I wonder why is that. I mean.
I do remember that, and that's part of the project builder itself. The good news, though, however, is that the Grails CLI worked beautifully the whole time. That was very easy to do anything I needed to do from the command line, and then the project would just refresh. And of course, all the Groovy support's still in there and everything. So right. I'm glad, and I hope that gets fixed even better in the future. But the message that I want to give to people is Grails is still active. It's still growing. It's still powerful. It's not, old school. It's still very current and around, and give it another look. And I think you'll be very pleased with what you see. And if you don't, you can always fall back and use Micronaut, right? Sorry.
And I think
just use either one.
I think go ahead, Sergio.
No, yes.
And just I don't have any specific statistics, but recently I've been seeing much noise in the Grails community. I mean, a lot of people trying out Grails 5 and support requests and activity in the community, Grails Slack channel especially. And so I think more and more people are trying out Grails now versus the past few months. So Grails 5 is definitely something. Yeah, and maybe it is Sergio,
The last thing I want to convey is so Grails 3 is now end of life. So by the end of September. So just to wrap up the podcast, this has to be as a wake-up call to everyone who is still using Grails 2 or Grails 3. It's time to upgrade. It should be as easy to, so Grails 3 to Grails 5 honestly is a really easy upgrade. Grails 2 to Grails 5 is more complicated. Partially because I mean the technologies are a huge change in the underlying technologies, and also it's like you are gonna see that what Puneet said, like the Groovy is more strict,
but it's a very sure, but it's a very friendly community. There's a lot of people out there to help you. I mean, very friendly. I'll say, present company accepted, maybe, but in general, you'll be able to get all the help you need, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, and that's what I always liked best about both the Groovy and the Grails community. And I'll include Micronaut on that, even though I'm not as involved in that side of the community yet. I mean, it's probably time to ramp up there, but yes, it's very welcoming to newcomers and to beginners and to anyone who has not spent a lot of time in these areas. Feel free to join the Slack channel. Feel free to ask questions wherever you like, and we'll do our best to help you out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there are a lot of things in Groovy 3. I mean, like, the new parrot parser, there are a lot of extension methods added. I mean, it's much better and much improved, and I like it more now. So
Yeah, I mean, as developers, we always see the parts that aren't quite done yet and things we want to work on. But this is a very powerful framework with many developer years of experience behind it, and a community that's more than happy to help you out in any attempt to work with it. So good luck, and hopefully you will find your own use cases and be willing to talk about them in public as well. Okay, well, let me just wrap everything up and say thank you all, very much for coming. I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch, and maybe you'll even, hear from people who might even listen to this particular Groovy podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ken.
Okay,
thank you for having us. Yeah, it's a good catching up with you.
Definitely. Bye-bye.